If you remember the last spot, all right, if you remember our last video, damn, I was rolling it. All right, here's our Redline update for our SS396 big block Camaro. We have the block is all assembled with pistons and camshaft, and now we're on to the valve train. So over here we have our heads are painted. They got fresh valve seats, fresh K-liners, did a little cleanup in the ports. So the flow numbers we had on these heads, almost in stock form, they should be capable of flowing enough for 500 horse, which we'll see what we do. We added a little more relative to the camshaft over what was in it, and that'll help out a lot. And of course, a little different intake manifold. So we're gonna try to get some improvements there. And maybe if we can be in the 425 range, that would be perfect. If you didn't see it, go back and look. And when we did the teardown on these heads, the valves were absolutely mushroomed over, you know, in here. I mean, they were flat. Instead of being peaked up along that lines, they were just sitting like this because they were hammered over from lack of oil, quite honestly. It ran low on oil because it was burning oil. You know, things heat up real bad and they just pounding the daylights out of them. We had to cut a couple of them off and file the rest of them. So that end of it was ugly, but we got fresh valves this time around, and we're not gonna let it run low on oil again. All right, so let's get these heads back together so we can get that motor done. So just went through and finished on the second head, going through and measuring the shims, or what's needed for the shims to get that spring height correct. And so what we're doing, we explained it well enough before, but the idea is there's tolerance between this seat and where this keeper land is at. And then obviously you have tolerance relative to the angles and the keeper land on the keepers. And then the retainer, of course, where the seat is at for the spring, and then the angle here again. So then you have the tolerance stack up of the parts themselves, but then you also have the casting. And the casting has the spring pocket, the depth where that's at, relative to where the seat has been put in. And since we changed out the seats, it should be fairly consistent, but at the same time, there's going to be some variation. I've had heads that have actually zero variation. Things are dead on perfect. This one happens to be off a little bit here and there, but the range isn't real huge. It's ranging variations about 15,000. So I get a 30,000 in some, and I got 45 in the others, and it's no big deal. The key is that spring height is exactly the same when we're all said and done and assembled. So worst case is you actually don't have enough spring pocket to package in here, meaning you would have to maybe cut this pocket deeper. That's an option. The other option is you can get these keepers and retainers to where they're, call them offset, so where it would sit up just a little bit higher, down a little bit more. So there are some options in here. You do have to be careful that you always have enough, you know, of area, if you will, above for your rocker to ride on. There's even situations where if you have a really big spring for like a high lift cam, then what you would do is actually get longer valves, and they come in multiple lengths to accommodate that. My next step is to take our finished assembled cylinder heads and mock this up and check for clearance from the valves to the pistons. To do that, I'm just going to use the old gasket, which was actually a 40 thou. Ultimately, I'm going to use an 80 thou. That just means I'll have a little more clearance. Set the cylinder head on, just mock it up with a couple bolts just to hold it tight around number 1. And then I'm going to take and set my valve train on, rotate the engine over real slowly with some clay up on top of these pistons. What'll happen is as the valve comes down, it'll hit the clay, leave an imprint in the clay, not touch the piston, ideally, and show us how much clearance there is between the intake and the exhaust valves. So here, gently, pull the clay off. This is on the exhaust side, at 320, that's a poo load. So that won't be an issue whatsoever. You want somewhere around 100 to 120. Now the intake you can see smashed down quite a bit more. And on the intake, you can deal with a little less because the intake doesn't grow with heat like the exhaust valve does. And we're at 150 there. So mind, that's 150 with a 44 thousandths gasket. So that's more like probably 200. All kinds of clearance. We're not trying to get radical and crazy with this anyway, so we know we got plenty of room for the valve lift. We got plenty of room at higher RPM where the valve wants to throw down more because of the inertia of the valve. And it won't get close to the piston, it won't hit it, barring any other catastrophe, but in general purpose, it'll be fine. So now at this point, I can take and put my new head gasket on here. I can take my new fasteners and the fresh cylinder head, get that set down on here, torque everything through in its sequence, and get the cylinder heads on it. Then we're one more step closer to having a long block. These pushrod guides have a little paint on them from the last rebuilt when we did the appropriate amount of overspray on them. And but you know, while I'm doing this, you know what, this would be a perfect time for you to click subscribe and do all that cool stuff. And you'll see that we got a lot of other videos out there that are equally as entertaining. Well, maybe a little more entertaining than me cleaning parts, but